These little bodies, save them and keep adding to them.
All right, we're ready to reconvene the Budget Committee, and we just need to get started back because we had said that we would at 4 o'clock hear information about the appropriations. So I don't know, would we want to start with saying what we were planning to do, or?
We're ready to start on appropriations if we want to.
Well, the recommended budget itself on the appropriation area includes a total 6% reduction for that area, that category. We did utilize again this year the process through which the volunteer panel that United Way has overseen for us reviewed the agencies in terms of eligibility, et cetera. They did also make a recommendation about funding within those constraints at a 6% reduction with a similar to their allocation that they do with United Way funds that looked at a prioritization, focusing first on food and shelter needs and then other needs as a secondary priority after that. And so did make an allocation, I believe, generally with that perspective in mind, and then brought that forward to the board for consideration. And so, you know, really it's a board decision on how you want to allocate those funds. We wanted to be very clear what was recommended. We approached it really more of as an in sum 6% reduction, just because that's a similar reduction that city functions undertook in terms of the budget reductions we faced across most of our departments, and so we wanted to treat outside agencies similar to how we had to budget our own city functions. So that's where we're at with that, and really look for board guidance and preferences in terms of how you want to allocate those dollars. But this budget is built with a 6% reduction in mind in the appropriation category, as we showed you last night.
Could you be more specific of exactly the direction we gave United Way? Did we ask them to divide out as they saw fit, or just
what we asked them
to verify that these were appropriate?
Well, my understanding is that we wanted them to do two things for us. Serve as a clearinghouse to validate the agencies in terms of how they're functioning, that they're performing, the roles that they're doing, that they're good organizations to be working with, funding. There's no issues there in terms of the mechanics and structure of those organizations. But we did also ask them for a recommendation in terms of that allocation within our budget parameters, that we not only wanted to use the volunteer panel to look at those agencies and validate those agencies, but also give us their recommendation on what they think the best allocation of those funds would be, knowing that the board ultimately has the final say in that, and that it is truly just that, a recommendation, and then the board then will make the final decision whether to accept, modify, do your own thing in terms of how you allocate those funds. So that had been the understanding I think Russ and I had from working with the board and what we implemented in doing this year's budget and bringing the proposed budget to you. Also knowing that honestly we misstepped a little bit last year in not bringing the specific recommendation forward, just sort of dealt with it in total, and wanted to be very clear about what's recommended and give you a chance to chime in and give direction on this from this point. So I don't know if you'd like to bring.
Do we have anybody who wants to speak, or do we want to just discuss among ourselves?
I covered okay.
If there's any,
okay.
they have already come and spoken with us, really, but. As I say, I don't know whether the committee wants to make some comments themselves or to have some of the individual agencies and/or United Way.
Okay. Do we have
Make some
copies of that?
comments.
Well, it sounds like to me, the United Way did exactly what the instructions they gave them. I guess one that I see that's been pretty severely cut is J.L. Clay, senior citizens, compared to the rest of them, just glancing over them. And I guess I'd like to have a little bit more explanation why that one has been more severely impacted than some other ones.
I too noticed that, so I don't know. Do you want to come up, please, and identify
Russ is going to go
yourself?
ahead and hand out, this is a summary that United Way gave us in terms of the direct and indirect benefits of the various
Right.
funded agencies, just so that gives an overview. And you may want to cover that as well as other insights on the process and where we are.
The first thing that the volunteers did is they really established a criteria, just with the economy and all things considered, of what they would look at and kind of prioritize as the most critical needs. And you can see on the first handout that was handed out at the last meeting, it just says at the top that they made the priorities based on safety, housing, and food were the first things that they looked at when all the agencies came in. And with the limited funding, they just based all their decisions on the services that the agencies provide. And every single agency provides a needed service in the community, but they had to prioritize it, based on the funding that was available. And we did explain in here just some of the things that they looked at with J.L. Clay and the reasons that they felt they might be able to withstand a greater cut as compared to other agencies.
The other piece we just handed out to you is an allocation summary that gives you the actuals from 2005 through the current budget year, then includes a column for the request received from each of the agencies in terms of funding, and then the recommended request, which is in tune with our 6% reduction that the volunteer panel gave us in terms of a recommendation.
Okay. Now, tell me about this here. This is the result for last year's budget, correct?
Correct.
And so it doesn't say, but now, I'm sorry, look down here at GraceWorks, that 37% down, did GraceWorks indeed get a 37% cut?
I think, is that a comparison to their request?
That's the request.
That was their
That's
request in
request
210.
versus
Right.
recommendation. And then the second column, is that recommendation versus current year funding?
Correct.
Okay, so the first column of percentages is compared to their 2010 request, and the second column is the recommendation compared to their actual in the existing budget.
The years.
So the years are a little off,
because
kinda
it's
off
not
a year.
Fiscal year, it's calendar year.
To get fiscal year, you need to add one to each of those years, probably.
Oh, okay, so this is talking about what we're looking at
Yeah,
right here.
the 10 request and recommendation really is 2010, 2011.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this
Yeah.
is what we're considering.
That's
And this is
prospective.
2009.
because these are calendar years instead of our budget years.
So the requests and recommendations are for 2010, 2011.
Yeah, I don't want to seem ungrateful for all the hard work you and your committee have done, and I know there were lots of hours that went into it, and none of these are easy decisions from our standpoint to say yay or nay, and there is some discussion sometimes whether we should be doing this at all, but I think probably I would feel a little more at ease if we didn't cut some of them so severely, if we could just kind of rebalance some of those that are taking the biggest hit, would be my feeling. And again, I'm very appreciative of how hard you worked on it.
Well, and you do have the final decision, so this is just the recommendations that come from the volunteers. Again, based on the critical needs that they put in place. And one other thing that is important that you read through was the first document that was just passed out about direct and indirect benefits. All of the agencies, you can read through this and see the benefits that they actually, how they benefit the city of Franklin and the services that they provide. And there's not a one that doesn't have a value add. And just when you have limited funding and you have to consider the economy, like you said, you just have to make tough decisions, but in the end, that's the recommendation to you. But you have the final say.
And as you have stated, every one of them was found appropriate to receive money, and I guess the other thing is every one of them is worthy.
Yes.
No question about that. I do also have a concern, though, about some of them that were hit the hardest. Gerald Clay is the biggest one there.
ARC.
ARC,
ARC, if you will look, they actually requested less funding.
Right.
They cut themselves because they said they just felt that was money they could leave on the table for another agency to use.
Oh, wow.
So they were not really, they self-cut the amount of funding they received.
Russ, do we have breakdown of our relationship with any of these organizations, with the police department and our services that they provide to their police?
Well,
Yeah,
the
you
document
something
that you have really purports to answer that question. I asked Pam to put that together based on our discussion last week, I think it was, or the last meeting when we spoke about these different agencies. It's very difficult to measure the direct and the indirect cost savings, if any, to the city. I mean, obviously, there's a benefit if we answer a domestic dispute and the police officer can leave the scene and go back on patrol if someone from an agency is there to stay with the offended parties. That's something that we could probably go through and document. Out of the great scheme of things, it probably will not be a large amount of money, but it is a meaningful event when we can put someone, let's say if it's the third shift, or now the second shift of police, and they can go back on patrol when we have perhaps fewer people on the street. It's a little bit more difficult when you get into some of these other agencies. Pam mentioned to me the Boys and Girls Club. I don't know how much additional patrolling we might have to have if we did not have activities for youth that keep them busy during the hours when they might be outside. That's a little bit more difficult to do. We can try to spend a little time over the next year and put some numbers to that, but that's not going to be a quick and easy mathematical calculation.
So we really don't. I'm just wondering how ARC, the Boys and Girls Club, we know for domestic violence, they go to the place, they pick up the children and the spouse, and they bring them to their center, where we would not have any place to put those people. We would have to outsource and pay for that service because we couldn't bring them to the city hall or to the police station. We don't have beds for them, we don't have facilities. So is the police department or any of our departments at all interacting in providing any kind of direct service for any, like our community child care, community housing partnership, GAP? By the way, there's 10 here, there's 11 on the sheet. Well, okay, never mind. Number 3.
Well, if I could take your example.
Yeah, you know what I'm
I mean,
talking about.
Ostensibly, none of these programs would fall under our jurisdiction. We would
Right.
not put people up. We would not go rent a hotel room for them. Our job would be to stay with them until the appropriate state agency
Okay.
or someone else would come in. But if there is a nonprofit agency that steps in and fills a particular need that will allow our staff to get back to their real purpose, I think there's probably what you could call a direct linkage there, where there is some direct saving that we might possibly be able to measure. You could almost say none of these nonprofits would be in existence if we were doing it.
If we were...
If we were providing a service, none of these
Right.
people would
No,
exist.
absolutely not, but we wouldn't be doing that.
And another way to look at it too, I mean, if the nonprofits weren't here to provide the service, I mean, what impact would that have on the city? I mean, would that increase the work of the police department, from having to check reports out at nursing homes or, to children who might be on the street that aren't currently on the street, getting into trouble? So you kind of have to think of it that way too.
Yep, that's a good point. But these agencies do exist, and okay, anybody want to stir the pot and take out a number? Because honestly, I don't know where to start with this.
Pam, I remember on the documents you gave us at the previous meeting that you were at, that there were some indications about why J.A. Clay, and I think we need to go back and keep reminding ourselves of the safety, housing, and food criteria. And what I remember, some of the comments were their ability to count services for the Clay Center. Another item was that they didn't do their own fundraising, ability to do
Well,
other
those, I mean, are
fundraising.
just things, again, they first looked at the, critical needs and then just kind of looked at agencies to where the funding was the most critical, and some of the things they really talked about with J.L. Clay that might, be able to help them going forward is looking at doing additional fundraising, just because with the number of seniors that they do have going to J.L. Clay, they have a good base there to be able to plan some fundraising, and that is something that's looked at with all of the agencies that were requested funding. There are just some that are better equipped, to be able to do that. And then with the, as far paperwork that's turned in by all of the agencies, we look at that and talk to the agencies and ask them, are they double counting, people that come in, or is this a true number of individuals they served? And with J.L. Clay, it's not clear on their ability to track serving an individual one time. That person may be in and out multiple times that day, and so it wasn't just it wasn't clear counting. So they just kind of looked at that so that they could possibly find a way to better track that as far as number served, so it's a purer number. And then of course the other thing was, and this is just something that people have been a part of the City of Franklin allocation from the beginning. We still have some of those volunteers. We always try to bring new people in, so you have a fresh perspective. But it is brought up, the cuts that J.L. Clay received over a 3-year period, just to get them back in balance with 33% of their budget. The funding from Franklin doesn't represent more than that. And some of those volunteers, again, are still a part of this allocation process, and said, well, there's no indication in the paperwork they filled out that they've ever made up any of that funding. So they were able, to make adjustments and do with less funding, and just with it being the times that they are, they just felt they could withstand the greatest cut. And again, it's not, nobody likes to have to cut. Allocating money is a lot more fun. We need extra money to be able to give away.
Amen.
So this is just kind of what they base their decisions on.
But on these applications, you get information from each of the agencies about what their outside funding is other than this funding.
Yes.
And you take that into consideration when you look at the overall
Yeah,
formula.
they kind of go through and look at all the information. And again, this year was the first year, instead of having two panels that reviewed two different groups of agencies, we consolidated the panels, and they were able to, everybody heard from all of the same agencies. So this was one group of volunteers making this recommendation.
So the other people who were cut last year were able to find some funds some other places? Is that what you're saying?
For last year or this year?
No, I mean, well, most of them were cut last year also.
Yeah, I would have to go back and look, but anytime a cut is recommended, I mean, they recommend whether it's an increase or funding or a decrease, they feel there's a need there for why they recommend that. And it doesn't say that it doesn't hurt everybody, that you cut some. But they made the considerations based on information they had.
Is there any?
And where are we going with this?
Well, I think we have to make a recommendation to the board about whether we want to follow this this request.
May I make a few statements?
Sure.
First off, well, first off, I don't think you can go back, and if you can, Russ, you need to produce that, please, and find anywhere in the recommendations of the committee in 2005 or 6 or 7 that United Way would be involved in the reallocation or redistribution of the funds. That's the issue. I don't think you can find that. What the committee said was that they would review the merits of each of the organizations, but nowhere that I can find and nowhere that I've seen is that part of the charge for United Way to go back in and reallocate the funding. Last year was the first time. And the reason it slipped by was because we were expecting, or I was expecting, and I think the board was expecting, a straight 6% cut. That's what should have happened last year. Well, actually, we asked for a 10% cut last year, 6% cut this year. But that's the charge of that particular group that studied that policy in 2005. As far as some of the things that were said concerning the jail, Clay Senior Citizen Center, it's difficult for me to sit here because I have to wear two hats. And certainly there's someone out there saying, well, he's just protecting his turf, and that's not necessarily so. I do not believe that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen can give taxpayer money to another organization for redistribution. And I thought, I'll be honest, I told Russ this and I told Eric too, I thought we had settled this last year. And I really thought that we'd settle this. United Way would be judging the merits of the 501c3s. We would, based upon the recommendation of these two guys right here, would come back in with the funding. If it's a straight 6% across the board, so be it. If it's a straight 5% across the board, so be it. If one of the 501c3s jumps out and grabs you, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and they're not meeting the qualifications and those, then that's the decision that we have to make. If United Way came back and said, hey, we're not recommending funding on this organization at all, then there's procedure in the memorandum that Russ wrote in 2005 that drops that particular 501c3 organization. To come back and go back over this and go back to and pick on the Clay Center. Go back last year to 18%. Go back again this year to 15%. I will tell you that the Clay Center pulled $15,000 from reserves this year in order to be able to run the balance of the year. That was out of a building fund trust that we had set up, that the board of directors set up. You go back in, and that was all explained to the committee, to the United Way committee, when we went through all of this. As far as the duplication of numbers, you know, guys, those numbers that are turned in as far as attendance, that's the way we've been doing it, and no one has said anything about it for 5 years that I've been doing it, and no one that I know of said anything before that. If you go back and you say to the J.L. Clay Senior Citizen Center, you did okay last year on less, that's nothing more than management. That's nothing more than what the director was hired to do. Go back in. If there's an area where we're wasteful, that's what we should be doing this autumn.
Yeah.
Be looking at the budget.
I agree.
That's what the director did when he went there 5 years ago. He looked at the budget. Now, that's being reviewed as a criticism by the United Way. Bottom line is, United Way's function, in my opinion, is this: judge the merits. If you would like, it says, the subcommittee strongly recommends that the United Way be encouraged to act on behalf of the City of Frankfort in the analysis of needs and the review of social agencies. But nowhere does it say anything in this memo that's dated January the 6th, 2005, from Russ to Jay Johnson, that United Way is to be involved in the reallocation, redistribution, anything of funding. And what should the funding recommendations, if it's 6%, should come from Eric and from Russ, not from United Way. It's not. I simply won't agree to have taxpayer money go to another organization for redistribution, reallocation, reallotment, whatever it is. Use them. They review us. They come back to us. They tell us if there's something that we can do better. Fine. But the money stays here. If it's 6% reduction, if it's 10% reduction, we live with it. I understand that. We've cut salaries. We've cut water meters out. We've cut gas meters out. We've redid contracts. That's not a gig. Guys, that's a compliment. You know, when you sit there and you look at something and says, you have done less on last year, therefore we expect you to do less on this year. And it's gotten down to where that just simply does not happen. So, you know, do whatever you need to do, but it should not be a recommendation. First off, they shouldn't even ask. That was settled last year, as far as that. Shouldn't even ask. They should have judged on the merits. I'll give anybody a copy of this if we've got documentation, any place that shows where they were ever requested to do that, and they sure didn't do it the first 3 years. They only did it last year, and they did it again this year. So that's kind of my stand on that.
May I say one thing? Just one thing that's very, very important, just to make sure everybody understands. United Way of Williamson County is the facilitator of this process. It's community volunteers who are making the recommendations. And it's based on United Way of Williamson County's allocation process, but it's still the community volunteers who are making the recommendations.
And I would just say, there's value in getting that input from the community volunteers, and they are not allocating the money for you. They are making a recommendation to you that you can choose to act on, accept, you can modify, you can go completely your own direction. That's your choice. But you're not giving them the authority to allocate funds. You're just asking for their input on a recommendation to do that. And if this board directed it for us not to do that, I missed that completely when we discussed about this, because I thought it was clear we still wanted a recommendation, but the board would, at the end of the day, make a very clear decision about whether they accepted it, whether they changed it, whether they did their own allocation, but there was still a value in getting that recommendation from volunteers. So Clyde and I may differ in that interpretation of the board's direction, But I still felt that there was a direction to at least receive that input, and so that's what we acted on to provide you with, and to use the panel to not only do the base assessment of organizations, but also give a recommendation on, if this is the pie, how do you divide the pie?
Yep. Well, it was my understanding exactly what Clyde just said. I thought it was coming back to you all, and that there would be a 6% across-the-board reduction, and that you would be recommending, that you would take the recommendations and then put it together here for us, and then we would go over that. Of course, we have none of that information. You know, we don't know how they arrived at that. As you said, you know, the volunteers and everything, take a look at that. But I'm curious, you know, they took a look at every organization on this list, what they're doing and how they were affected and what kind of fundraising they do. We see none of that, so I have no basis to make a judgment on that. So it comes to us, or comes to back here, to this committee, and my understanding was it was coming, those recommendations, that was all coming back to you all as you put this budget together, and that I was going to see a 6% cut across the board. That was my understanding. And when I saw these numbers, it's sort of like, oh, okay, that's 6% per agency. But anyway, that was my understanding of it. And I know about that you're referring to.
I'd like to propose a motion that we accept the approved merits of all these organizations as put forth by United Way panel, and thank them for their effort, but reject their recommendations as far as allocation, and recommend that it be a 6% reduction overall for each organization.
Second.
And can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I think my only comment to that is I didn't quite understand it. I thought that United Way did what they were supposed to do. And I certainly appreciate the hard work that went on.
Sure.
Now, if we as a body are just going to say we want to make 3% cut or 6% cut or 2% gain, then we shouldn't waste United Way's time.
Yep, that's right.
They've spent time and effort doing this.
Yep.
And to ask them to continue to do something, if all we're going to do is say, well, let's carte blanche do whatever we're going to do, and if that's what we want to do, that's okay. But we are wasting volunteers' time and effort to go through a very detailed process to understand the program and to make a recommendation. And if we're going to ignore that recommendation and do it time and time again, then we should say, United Way, thank you for the work that you've done, but I'm not going to waste your time anymore. I used to say something when I was in the school board, if we're not going to listen, don't ask.
Yeah.
And so that would be my thought on that, and I appreciate the work that you've done.
I have a question. Is this the only funding that you are making a decision on for United Way, or do they get other United Way funds other than?
This is completely separate.
Yeah.
I understand that, but I'm asking the question though. Do they also get other United Way, do these organizations get other United Way funds?
They go through our allocation process, yes.
Okay.
Our United Way allocation process.
The answer is yes.
They get United Way funds through a separate United Way fund allocation process. We've tried to piggyback on that process somewhat by asking United Way to make a recommendation for the city's chunk of funding here.
And we always kept the city of Franklin is separate, a separate group of volunteers that may volunteer on both panels, but it's always, this money has always been kept separate.
Well, before last year, did you make recommendations on the amounts? But they were always either increases or stayed the same, is that correct?
I would have to look back to be able to answer that for sure.
Some were cuts.
Yeah.
To make an effort to adhere to that 33% maximum.
Oh, right, but,
At one point, there had been-
but on a different, for a different reason.
But those were in the early years.
then with that-
Ask that question again, if you don't mind.
Oh, I was saying, does United Way look at these organizations in another, in a different circumstance for allocating funds besides for the city of Franklin?
Yes.
Sure.
What was supposed to have happened on this right here was that this would have streamlined the process somewhat. That if you were asking for city funding and you were asking for United Way funding, that was supposed to streamline the process, which, in my opinion, it absolutely did not. It made it duplicated, and there was just enough difference between what the paperwork you fill out for the city and for United Way. There was just enough difference that you had to go through a double paperwork and the total. If whatever United Way did, you had to come back and do the same thing almost for the city's allocations and appropriations. We go to the county, we go to the city, we go to United Way too, but you do this, you do quite similar things, but the questions are not all the same, and the information that's being asked is just tweaked a little different, that you could not use the same paperwork to turn into United Way and to turn into the city's portion for the United Way. There's two different paperworks.
So the idea was to streamline in terms of...
Well, it even says it in here.
Okay, that not just for the city, but for the agencies?
For all agencies where there was a duplication.
But I thought there's always been a recommendation of funding from the United Way. Is that true?
That's true, and the sheet
Okay.
I just passed out shows you over the years, when we started this in 2005, up until the recommendations of this year, what the recommendations were, and up until last year, the recommendations that were made were accepted.
So we didn't just start United Way recommendations. That has been going on for some time.
But the only cuts that were recommended...
We just have had cuts the last 2 years.
No. The only cuts that were recommended previous to last year were to
Dealt with the
adhere to
33%.
the 33%.
That were the
guideline
cuts, but then that money was recommended to other agencies. It wasn't left on the table. So other agencies received increases from the money that was cut.
What's missing from here is 2004, which was the year prior to the United Way taking over. And there were some meaningful changes, I think, between 2004 and 5.
Well, I don't want to be left feeling I'm insensitive to this whole issue, because I do appreciate the hard work in determining the merit of all these organizations. I just am struggling a bit with the allocation this year, because I guess maybe my upbringing my parents told me and my in-laws told me, says always be nice to old people. So. and all of a sudden I really appreciate that, because I'm getting old too. So,
That wasn't the deciding factor. It was just basing it on what the volunteers felt the needs were.
But I didn't want you to think that I was insensitive about it, because I do think that there's a body of work, two bodies of work. You determine the meritorious portion of it, and then you determine the allocation. And so.
And when there was an opportunity for increase, then it would be helpful to know comments. It's just that 2 years of decreases mean that there's no one that's immune from them. And I should say, no one is immune from the effect. No organization is immune from the effects of that. Well, let's have some other discussion. But
I guess the question is, I kind of agree with what the mayor said. We ask somebody to do a job. They have certainly lots of details than we have before us tonight. And either we continue to ask them to do that and accept their recommendations, or we go back to doing this ourselves.
Well, Mike, the problem here, and I'm trying to do some math here, just trying to figure out how much this looks like. The problem with that, in 2005, when I came on the board, one of the things they said they wanted to farm this out because they go, oh, it's so hard for us to sit here because some of us are on the boards of these places and some of us directors or whatever, and it's really hard for us to choose and figure out where we want to cut or who we want to give money to, and I agree with that. I don't want to get mirrored down into that, but golly, if we have to make cuts and we make 6% clear across the board, I think that's just more fair. I'm looking at these numbers and I'm thinking to myself, if I were any of these agencies, I'd rather take a 6% cut across the board than that. And you know, I totally agree with what was said. You know, you're doing this job and we've asked you to do that and you did what you're supposed to do. And I'm not trying to undermine that at all, but I'm just saying, what do we need to be doing here? What should we be doing? And honestly, it doesn't get us mirrored down in the process if we don't do what you just did, because you did what we shouldn't be doing. If we do the cuts that we should do, I think it's more fair to do 6% across the board. Then we don't get mirrored down and trying to figure out, you know, is Clay Center or Bridges or who's going to get the 10%, who's going to get the 6%. And I don't know how you did that. I think that's a really tough job to do because I wouldn't want to be in that group of people to do that. But I think as a body of elected officials, in order to, and knowing that a lot of us are involved in some of these agencies, I think it's something we should have been doing all along. If we're going to make a cut, let's make it across the board.
And if I may, well, then that's fine.
Yeah.
But then next year, let's just decide we're going to go
Up front,
flat,
so
we're
we
going to
don't
go
put them through
3%, and don't ask United Way to spend the time to do that. I mean, if we don't have the
right.
political will to take their recommendation, which is what you're saying, that if we don't have the political will to take their recommendation, then by God, let's don't ask for it.
That's right.
Let's just hide behind the
Totally.
numbers and just say 6% and that's it and that's where we're going. And I'm not saying that we should or shouldn't, but I get really, I really am concerned about asking them to come here, do that work, spend the hours that they do, and then say, well, we really just want to cut it 6%, and that's okay if we do that. I don't have objection to that at all. But I'm going to get redundant. We don't need to then go through the charade of doing what we've asked them to do.
I totally agree with that, John. The other thing is, at this point in time, if we've come to I don't know if we've come to any conclusion here tonight, but if we have, then do we say, gee, you know what, we should have been doing this all along, and we're gonna, you know, we're not just gonna go along to go along because we put you through this, and we probably maybe shouldn't have, but yet we did, so because we did, so we're just gonna go take it this year and then maybe go back to next year, cut across the board. I don't know if I'm willing to do that. I feel bad that we might have put you through that, when I think personally that we should just cut across the board 6% with everybody. And I'm willing to make that decision and go with the 6% and profusely ask you to forgive us for putting you through it, but I think we need, personally, I need to do the right thing, and I think I would feel better looking at this saying, you know what my opinion is, government shouldn't be in the jurisdiction of doing this, period. So we're going to shut it, rip it down, just be done with it. And
Make that motion.
yeah, I have, many times, John. And you talk about political will, nobody has the political will to do that. And you know, I always look like the ogre, and I certainly support these organizations, and I think the community needs to step up more and support this. If people complain to me and saying that they want the government to quit doing this, then they need to step up and come to the plate too and help these organizations get funded. But that's another subject. But I agree.
Call the question.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Question.
all in favor of hearing the question, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. Now, then the vote, the motion is to make
I'll be
across the
glad to
board.
repeat it. But I was very careful about the way I said it.
Did you write it down?
I made some notes so I could recall it down.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
That we graciously accept the approval of organizations based on the merits as determined by the United Way panel, but reject their recommendations as to allocation this year and recommend a 6% across the board cut.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
There's one no. Alderman Skinner. Thank you.
Then I'd like to make another motion that in the process for next year, we return the determination of these back to the board and not to United Way.
Is there a second to that motion?
Is that a motion or recommendation? Both.
Well, that other was a recommendation. Let's just remember.
Second.
Yeah, we have to recommend to the board.
I would
Is
just
that, we have to vote
call
on
a
it?
point of
I don't
order
know.
that.
I think it's just
that's
asking.
Probably not a legitimate motion considering what the subject of this meeting is. And if we do something like that, that decision has to go back to the full board for approval. So I might suggest that you put that on a work session for discussion.
Yeah.
And then we can do it that way. I think.
Right.
Would that be a separate way to
Yes,
work
yes.
that?
We just need to have
a work session.
because they start so early on
I
this.
understand, we need, if we're gonna do this, then we need to make sure the full board understands what
I
we're
agree.
doing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we
they have to
discussion
agree
about
with
it,
it.
and then we
They may
can give
vote us
United
down.
Way the direction.
Well, as I recall, we did have that discussion in January, and I thought that was,
We thought the direction was still to get a recommendation to.
right. But I believe if you go back and look at the minutes, I did ask if that meant that or I stated
Yeah,
that meant
yeah.
that we would, that the
Vote on it.
board would have the decision.
Well, and that you still do. That's never changed. This is about how you use and what you ask the United Way to
I
do.
think we were understanding it to
Okay,
be.
so we'll put that on.
Yeah, obviously there are different
request is
interpretations of what that is.
To put that on for our work session. Okay. Are there other items to bring up in discussing the budget? I know the one where we're talking about the police cars for,
We have a couple follow-up
Okay,
items.
please, go ahead.
We'll do police probably after this, but I wanted to give you a quick response on a question that had been brought up about, on page 139 of the document, there was an item in the street maintenance budget that related to rentals, and we didn't have that answer off the top of our head last night.
What page was that again?
193.
thank you.
And it's line item category 85-200, and it's
Yeah.
entitled rentals, but that is also inclusive of lease payments. And so
It is, yeah.
we speculated a little bit last night, and we confirmed looking at this this morning, that increase is directly attributable, the $24,500 increase is directly attributable to the lease payments involved in the compost screener. So that's where that got folded in. When we first looked at it, I was thinking about the fact that we used to rent that equipment. Now that it may be in that same category, but it is in the category of the lease payment, which I think is it a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease?
I think it's 5.
5-year lease payments for the screener, and so that's folded in here, and that's why you see that jump up in
Now,
that line item.
is that the lease-to-own ID?
Yes, we will own the equipment
Right.
at the end of the lease, but we're using about a 3.39% lease term to get that, so it's,
And we're going to change
Very
that
favorable.
caption in the final version of the
Okay.
budget where it says rentals and leases.
And leases.
so I
Okay,
think
so
that,
that's one of the
that
items.
sort of created a little confusion for us too, so we'll make sure that's
Okay.
a little more clear.
And what else?
And then really the next thing was the vehicles, I guess. I don't know if there was any other,
Yeah, the
We've got some
police
other
vehicles.
nonprofits here, if anybody had any questions.
other
All
outside
right.
agencies.
If there are other outside agencies, are we, because on them, we did do just the 6%.
They had a straight
That is
6%.
Straight 6%?
Yeah.
Is that,
I had one question for transit,
Okay.
and that question was, when do they expect the modernization dispatching software to be up and running.
Allison Shoemate is here from
150.
Transit.
Pardon?
Allison Shoemate is here from
Yeah,
Transit.
and for those of y'all that don't know, Debbie's got an illness in her family and wasn't able to be here, so we good Alice.
We have already gone online with the on-demand portion of the software that happened this past week. So that portion is up and running. In another month, we will be implementing the fixed route dispatch, and the project should be completely completed by August. So we're phasing it in 2 steps.
And I guess my question was relating to, we had hoped that it would save money, and I'd like to see somewhere down the road after it's had a while to work to show us how it is saving money, because I know the police have a something similar as far as dispatching, so the car the closest goes.
Right.
Something
I
like
believe we'll see the most efficiencies in the transit on demand, because it will help us get more people and less trips.
Right. Thank you.
That's already up and running, so, thank you.
Anything else on that, on transit? Thank you very much.
One other quick thing to hand out to you. We had a mistake in one of the pages on page 59 in the budget document. For whatever reason, the bottom line,
Didn't have the numbers.
the
dates. Didn't have
the
the year on
x-axis of this chart it just had boxes. We don't know why that happened. It appeared on the computer, but it didn't appear when it printed out. So we just wanted to give you a replacement page for page 59, so that you had that.
Okay.
All the data is the same, but, so in your books, you can replace those. I think we're ready to talk about the vehicle leasing, purchasing approach, if you'd like to as well, with how we're approaching it with police vehicles. And this is something Russ worked on with police, and we've looked at today to try to give you a summary of what a straight purchase program looks like, what an all-lease purchase program looks like, and then a blend of lease and purchase might look like as well. Russ, do you want to take them through the sheet that you handed out?
Yes, if you can find the sheet, it says police vehicles lease versus purchase.
The handout today.
We left it on your,
Should have been at your seat when you got here.
That's right.
here's an extra copy.
Actually, it wasn't anything.
There you go.
Please.
Got
We
it,
got it.
sorry.
Do you still have?
Hiding.
We're okay?
We're okay.
Thank you.
I thought there was something else.
Do you have extra copies?
The very first line, or the first grouping there, is called routine rotation. In a perfect world, if we had 140 cars and we were going to replace them on an annual basis over 7 years on a regular routine, we'd buy 20 a year. And this gives you what the cost would be extended at current pricing. Keep in mind, some of the pricing may change as you go through the years, but whatever applies in one place is going to apply to all of these different variations. The second one would be, because we are behind after cuts of capital over the last couple of years, where we have about 40 vehicles that are approaching a high mileage situation that we would like to rotate out. If we bring forward cars from 2011 and bought them in 2010, if we aggregated them at the beginning, I gave you an example of what it would cost. I added in something for the opportunity cost of that money by spending it earlier, and then it extends out in the same way that it would under just a normal replacement routine. And the third version, what we did is to take 40 cars, the same 40 cars that we just bought in example 2, and lease them instead. But then also lease additional cars in years 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 to give you an idea of what the annual total cost would be if we continue to layer in those leases. And the recommendation that we're going to make, because we do have some capital money left in this year's budget that was originally appropriated, is to do a combination of the straight purchase and the straight lease. Go ahead and purchase 14 cars, which is the amount of money that we have left in there, and then begin to implement that 20 cars per year replacement cycle in 2011, excuse me, on a leased basis. And as you go through the years, you'll see how the numbers accelerate. But if you look in the total column, other than the timing of the expenditure, I think you'll find that the costs are very close, because if we have really three ways to pay for these vehicles. We can lease them, and the current lease that we have is at about 3.4% rate. If we borrow the money to buy the vehicles, the last bond issue we did, for example, was about a 3.2% rate. You know, if we invested the money when rates go back to normal, we would probably get somewhere in the 3% rate. So there's not a great deal of difference in terms of the opportunity cost of the way that you pay for these. And one of the things in talking to the chiefs this afternoon and with Eric is that this is something that you really need to make a decision on year to year, because as rates change, the only reason that we've gotten into leasing this year is because the rates were really almost overlaid on our borrowing rate. So we could lease just as easily and proficiently as we could to go out and borrow the money, and it was certainly better than what we could do to isolate the reserves that we had and take away from them. So this is something that I think you should really look at and examine every year. But this would give you an idea, if rates stayed the same, if the price of cars stayed the same, and you implemented this strategy in any of these different ways, you know, you're going to have some up and down cost in different years as you begin the layering. But when you had everything fully fleshed out, if you got into the fourth or fifth year of either one of these programs, the cost is going to be roughly equivalent.
And this would be 5-year leases is what this would anticipate when we do a lease, and would put us on a replacement cycle of about replacement every 7 years for the police vehicles. So what we're recommending, what we're moving forward with in particular is that bottom scenario, and are ready to move forward with purchase of 14 vehicles this year, and then, at least given the terms that we're looking at now, look at a lease of 20 a year for the next several years. And again, like Russ said, we'll make a call each year, just like we do when we borrow money. What's the best, most efficient way to get the money for a capital project? I think you can look at a similar approach. What's the best, most efficient way to purchase the vehicles? Is that a lease, or is the purchase a better option? And we'll just make that determination based on what the terms are at that given time, with a 20-year or 20 car a year target in mind in terms of what we need to replace, so that we do need to do that pretty systematically, so that we don't get ourselves in a position like we are right now, quite frankly, where we've got 25 vehicles right now that are hitting over 100,000, and in the next year we'll have another 24. So a year from now, if we do nothing, we'll have 49 cars at over 100,000 miles on them. So we do need to move forward now, because we've deferred some capital in this area for a couple years, and start a program like this that is probably some blend of lease and purchase over time.
The add-on equipment is included in the cost of this?
There's an estimate here for that. It's, the base price is about $21,800. We're assuming by the light bars and the painting and the decals and some of the wiring that is necessary, another $4,000 to $5,000 for that. So that's just the estimate that we used in here.
That box in the right corner, that $25,815 that's used for each vehicle in here, is a fully equipped number.
That 25, which one is that?
Upper right-hand.
Upper right-hand corner, we've got that little box. That $25,815 is the basis for the cost of every vehicle that's in here.
Need a motion?
Yeah.
Is that?
You have a motion on which one of these to recommend?
I've got a couple more questions before I can figure this out. When we lease a car or cars, are there any stipulations that come with that lease, like additional penalties or anything? Because normally, you know, when you lease a car, you can't drive over a certain mileage and stuff.
This
So what
isn't,
do-
this
I
isn't
didn't-
your lease off of the
Right,
car lot. This
right,
is
well, no.
how we're paying.
Exactly. I knew that wouldn't be
Right.
the
That's a great
case at all.
question, yeah.
But what I'm saying is, when you do lease, do they put any, additional insurance that's required in a lease car like this? Or any other kind of policies that we would have to have that would be different than our regular policies?
We really manage it just like we manage the vehicles we own in terms of our insurance requirements. So it doesn't change that dynamic. It's really a financing tool that we have in place, and we essentially went out and received a kind of a
deal,
basic
yeah.
lease contract that we've now applied to the screener. We applied to the dispatch equipment,
Yeah.
and now we can apply to
Okay.
these vehicles
So-
as well. And it's really just a financing tool
Okay.
that allows us to pick 3, 4, 5 years
Yeah.
and an interest
The
rate
reason I
related
asked
to it.
that is because I just want to make sure there wasn't any additional monies attached in a lease agreement.
There are really
at all.
no other hidden costs
Yeah.
that hit us that we
Okay.
wouldn't
I
otherwise
just wanted to know
have.
that for insurance
Yeah, there's
purposes.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
We've tried to
right.
be
I
careful.
knew it wouldn't be like a person
Yeah.
renting a car. I knew that wouldn't be the case, but I just want to know if there was anything to do with insurance or anything
No, it's
different.
really just a financing
Okay.
arrangement that we've been able to develop really on a standard basis for whatever purchases we have.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there? You want to come up and, so we can be heard?
So you can be seen, Mr. Martin.
Pass the microphone. Yeah.
How did you turn them in?
We own them. We'll own them at the end of the lease. So it's really
It's a
just
lease purchase?
it's a lease purchase.
Okay, so
And we
it's,
pay for it over 5 years?
It's just a way to spread the cost over 5 years.
If you would, think of we're separating the vendor for whether it's Motorola or Ford Motor Company from the financing. We actually went to a bank and you approved a master lease back in November. And it's under that master lease that we're adding this equipment.
so it's lease
So-
purchase.
It's really a lease purchase.
Yeah, should be
It's
lease
a
purchase.
financial term. To the vendor that is selling it, Motorola or Dodge,
see the
to them,
difference.
they sold the car.
It's a
They sold the
purchase.
car.
This is just how we use a financial institution to spread the cost over whatever period of time we want to do it, 3, 4, 5 years.
Vehicle.
Or decide to make a straight purchase, depending on what the terms are at that time.
Something.
Can you pay off the lease early?
I believe you can. I believe you can pay it off without penalty. I'm not sure why we would
I
under
don't
these
know that we would.
circumstances, but
We have that option if we would.
But you have that option.
If we wanted to
struck
clear out the
well underneath
lease,
City Hall.
we could do it.
Let me tear it up.
I move we move forward with the combination of lease and purchase of police cars.
There's a motion and a second. I have a question on the combination of lease and purchase. Why would we, in 2010, we would just go ahead and buy 14
Yes.
cars, and then 2011, we wouldn't do anything?
no, you would start leasing on the second line, there's 20 cars that would be
There's a
leased.
deferral.
And you would start going 20 per year.
Oh, I understand
It's a
that,
year
but,
behind in terms of the costs.
so you wouldn't do that until the end of 2011, and you'd start paying on
Well-
it in 2012?
No, we'd start in fiscal 11 doing that, but we would have to add it, you would start paying for it in fiscal 2012. The cycle of the cars, the ability for us to get 14 now is there at the end of the model year, and we've identified that we can go out and get these cars. When these cars are gone, there will not be any available on state contract, which is where we're buying
Okay.
these through, until probably September, October.
It's a unique
January.
opportunity to get them in a more timely
Yeah, yeah.
basis
Because there's
now
kind
to
of some
purchase.
Right.
downtime where they
Sure.
change the model years.
That's right.
Right.
So there'll be a 4 or 5 month gap between the 14 and the 20, but the payments won't start until fiscal 11.
So really, we're only getting 14 for the next year. We're getting 14 at the end of this year, but,
You'd get 14 immediately.
right.
And then the next 20 would come sometime in October or whenever the state contract availability is there.
Earlier than you're getting it this year.
Is it August?
Usually it's in August when those bids
Okay.
go out.
So between now and August, you'd really get 34. 14 out of this
but you-
year's budget and 20 out of next year's, but the lease functions in arrears, so we won't actually have to make that first payment until the next fiscal year.
So we'll get them in August 2010,
Correct.
but we
Right.
won't start paying for them until,
You'll start paying for them in October of 2010, which is fiscal 11. These are fiscal years. that-
But that
that's
dollars
12,
are in 11,
that,
or in 12.
they're in 12.
Oh,
They're in
I'm sorry.
12.
Well, that's right, because we're not going to take possession until for the next fiscal year.
So when
there'll
does
be
the
a-
bank charge us for them?
The payment on the compost screener and those other things begins in October. So,
That would, October, that's 2010, October 2010, that would be in the 2011 fiscal year, would it not?
Yes, it
well,
would.
in my assumption, I assume that we would not start paying them until 2012.
So we'd have them for 8 months? No, whoa, no.
No, we get them in the second
9,
batch.
10 months before we start paying on them?
It depends how we add that to the lease. I'll go back and look at what the exact mechanism is to do that.
From a budgetary standpoint, you have the capacity to pay that first lease payment in 11 if you
If you wish.
If you
Okay, I
wish.
mean, that doesn't add, well, it would add, you know,
Like, one of the things we were
I think
able
it'll
to
be okay.
do with dispatch is we were able to phase that into this fiscal year. We were able to delay it into this fiscal year. So we may have the opportunity to do that with this as well. But if we don't, we've got budget capacity built in there for the lease of the 20 cars this year. So
But
you
if
could
it-
slide that column forward a year budgetarily, and we'd be fine. I think that's still to be determined with the lease arrangement.
but I think that would add to your 7-year cycle, though.
It would. I'll
It would.
rework this,
Yeah.
showing that we make the first payment in 11.
Okay.
But you-
But
yeah.
see, by the time you do your 7 years, though, you've got another payment in there
That's correct.
for every year. So
That's
that
good.
means for 7 years worth of that.
If everything's on a 5-year cycle, the first year is dropping off and you're replacing it. So you would actually have a potential repeat of that 2016 column
Yeah,
as an added cost,
that's right. But
which
as- but as
is
another-
still cheaper than some
Oh,
of the
I
other
think that's what I
options.
was just figuring right
Yeah.
here. It's still cheaper than
It's
the
still
straight
less than-
lease. It's still cheaper than straight lease,
Yeah,
but
it's
not
a little
this
bit
good.
better.
Not this
Yeah,
good.
right.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments? But yes, I think we do need to refigure that. Are we
We enjoyed the conversation.
Wait, cold pencil at Skinner, he fell asleep.
Okay.
His math teacher
All
will
in
do it
favor
every
of the
time.
motion officially, say aye. Opposed, no. Do we have any other?
Those are the
I
follow-up
think those are
items.
the ones that we
I didn't
That's
think
right.
kind of looked at.
Actually had
Okay.
another
so,
question, but I got it answered already, so.
Unless there are other questions.
There's nothing else in? Do I hear a motion to?
Wait,
Oh,
What?
well, that's what I'm saying, is there's no other.
What's
Oh.
left?
Are you about to adjourn?
Yes,
We
ma'am.
were.
Do you think this body ought to send a recommendation to this budget to the board? Should there not be a
Oh,
motion
you mean for
that?
the
Yeah,
entire budget?
Yeah, we'd
Let's
like
have-
you to
let's have a-
forward
I
this.
so move that we move this budget forward to the full board of mayor and aldermen
Thank you.
Third, second, third, and fourth.
with the appropriate calendar as outlined by administration.
Hit our targets.
Okay. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Opposed, no. Okay, so now,
So now our calendar is,
Next Tuesday,
Next Tuesday, you'll have the
meeting
first
tomorrow.
reading.
first meeting in June, last meeting.
Yes.
Second, the first meeting in June is public hearing.
Well,
Yes.
do we need to have a motion? Do we need?
that's what we're saying.
yeah.
I think-
Hallelujah.
Ever?
No, I don't think so.
No more budget,
Budget meeting.
no more budget, despite the 11 meetings.
Yeah, that's right.
Despite a few
And the note,
Pension
misinterpretations, I
slash,
think we could find.
pension slash,
Yeah, when is that?
that has been
We're going to need to
moved.
schedule
know
that
yet.
for the full board. We're looking at potentially the first week of June. for that meeting.
So it's not the 27th.
So
It will
now,
not be the 27th, because you have joint planning commission meeting that night, and 27th just won't work.
okay, so there's a motion to adjourn. I'm not sure. We
already did.
Second.
If you leave, that needs to be approved.
That's what I think too.
All in favor, aye?
Okay, so we're officially over. I will have to say that whenever I, oh yeah, that's right.